Hey guys, it's Pastor Justin here with another Snapshots from the Bible. And today I was reading through Psalm 78. And Psalms is kind of an interesting book to go through in your devotions because sometimes you feel like you got a good head of steam. Like, I read 5 Psalms today, and they were all like 7 verses. And then you get to Psalm 78, which has 72 verses, and it kind of slows you down. So you hit one of those super long chapters or Psalms in the Bible, and it kind of takes that oomph out of you. But it was a really fascinating psalm. It was kind of a history lesson. It's really interesting that this psalm is speaking to Israel, is speaking to Israel through their history and saying, this is your relationship with God over time. And there's several themes that come up, but the primary ones here are that God is faithful to his children and very merciful to them, while at the same time they continually rebel against him, they continually complain, they fall away from God. And so he's kind of trying to remind them because so quickly we forget. And he goes through this history lesson where he says, we got to remember, verse 4, we will not hide them from I'm sorry, verse 2. I will open my mouth with a parable. I will utter hidden things, things from old, things that we have heard and known, things our ancestors have told us. We will not hide them from their descendants. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord. So this is good. This is a call to remind people to remember what God's done. Let's not forget that. But the problem is we forget. We forget so often. And he says in verse 8, this is why he wants to do this, so that these future generations would not be like their ancestors, a stubborn and rebellious generation whose hearts were not loyal to God, whose spirits were not faithful to him. And he goes through like a lot of Exodus here. He talks about all these big events, how God was faithful. He gave them power. He guided them. He split the rocks in the wilderness. Verse 15 gave them water. But verse 17, they continued to sin against him, rebelling in the wilderness against the Most High. They willfully put God to the test by demanding food they craved. They accused him. God gets mad. But at the same time, it's interesting, like, God gets mad. He's furious in verse 21, for they did not believe him. Yet no judgment comes. He holds off on that judgment. It says, verse 23, yet he gave a command to the skies above, opened the doors of heavens, rained manna down for them to eat. So you see this wonderful display of mercy on God's part. Um, and he fills their bellies, but even before even as they're doing that, they kept on sinning. Verse 32, in spite of his wonders, they did not believe. And so anytime that would happen, finally God gets to a point where he says, well, now punishment has to come in. And he levies punishment upon them. Verse 35, this is what really caught my attention. I'm sorry, kind of leading up to it here. They remembered that God was their rock, that God Most High was their Redeemer. Ah, that sounds good. They remembered. But then they would flatter him with their mouths, lying to him with their tongues. So they're giving this surface remembrance, surface worship to God, but it doesn't go to the core of who they are. And why that is in verse 37, because their hearts were not loyal to him. So twice in this psalm, he speaks of the heart and loyalty. Who rules our heart? Because something does. Your heart is the core of who you are. And it's always driven toward what you're most passionate about. So if your family is ultimately the most important thing in your life, it's what you worship, it's what you look at, that's what rules your heart. That's where your loyalty lies. It's not a bad thing to love your family and be loyal to them, but still that's putting it on a level above God. And what if it's just our own comfort? What if it's our pleasures? What if it's, I could list a million things, but the question is, what rules your heart? Is it a desire for acceptance? Is it a desire to belong? Is it a desire to have your ego fed or to feel important? All these things can take precedence. And when that happens, our hearts are not loyal to God. And this issue of heart loyalty is something the Bible later talks about. Our hearts are made of stone and not flesh. And the prayer there is that God would take our hard hearts, our hearts that are not for Him, and turn it to flesh so that they start beating again and they beat for God. I mean, we were made to be for God. That's our purpose. That's, what we've fallen away from. But God calls us back when He redeems us. When we're saved in Jesus Christ, we are finally living our purpose once more. We're living it for God, and our heart is hopefully beating for God. And it takes some redirection because we're so used to living for other things. We're used to living for ourselves. We're used to our hearts being loyal to other things. So when we look at the Old Testament, we look at how often the Israelites fell away from God. It's easy to kind of sit there in judgment of them and going, ha, what idiots. God's on their side. He's doing all these amazing miracles. But when we say that, we're kind of pointing a finger right back at ourselves because the Israelites are us and we are them. They did the same things we did. They fell into sins. God helps them one day and they're praising God one day, and the next day, totally forgetting about God, totally putting ourselves and our needs first. And that should humble us, call us to repentance, and always having us check, where is our heart's loyalty at? Is it for God? Is it for something else? Is there something in my life that I value more highly than God? And in that case, why am I doing that? Where's that going to lead me? Just things to kind of chew over as we look at ourselves, as the Bible reflects back to us God's truth and also the state of our souls. We want to make sure we're right with God, that our heart beats for God. So let's read Psalm 78. Take these words, take this remembrance. Remember how God is always merciful to take you back. He's always going to give you a second chance in this life, as long as you return to Him. He won't ever say, well, that's it. That's the last chance I'm going to give you. Your heart wasn't loyal to me one too many times. He won't say that. He'll always say, welcome back. Welcome back. So that's my word of encouragement for you today. Have a great day.